Digital stuff does a lot of things really well. It can convey information very well, but we're wired for relationship. The gospel is relational.
Welcome back to the Same Commission podcast from Echoes International, where we explore what it means to be active in God's mission in this world, bringing the gospel to the nations, but in the 21st century. My name is Matt Pitts, and again, I'll be hosting our conversation today. In this episode, we're going to be turning our focus to digital content creation and the opportunities that offers us in evangelism, thinking about how the gospel can be shared in an increasingly connected online world, and what that might mean for mission today. And this is an area of strategic interest for us at Echoes. We see it as a really important way in which the gospel can be brought to hard to reach parts and hard to reach people in the world. And so with this in mind, I'm delighted to be joined for a second conversation by Andy Bannister, the Director of Solas. Andy, it's great to have you back with us. In the last episode, we looked at how we can reach our Muslim neighbours, and that was a really great conversation. So if you haven't listened to that, do go back and listen to that conversation as well. But we're going to shift gears now and talk about the digital space, which does actually have some relevance to the last episode, in that often Muslims can be quite hard to reach in terms of maybe where they are in the world, or certain aspects of culture that you can't get past in person sometimes. And digital content creation is also something that you would specialise in at Solas. So thank you for being part of this conversation.
You're welcome. It's great to be back on the show, Matt.
It's almost as though the last conversation just finished and we're recording the next one straight after it.
Wonders of technology.
And that there hasn't been a week in between. But yes, there we go.
Which is a relief, because people will be saying he's wearing the same shirt if they're watching
exactly,
the
which would be very worrying if I was wearing the same shirt. Well, I suppose it could have. Yeah, never mind. We'll carry on. Otherwise, this bit will get cut. Andy, what led you, and perhaps what led Solas into really emphasising good quality digital content creation in your part of God's mission?
It's one of those things, Matt. It's funny actually that you on the one hand you want to say it was an accident, but of course there are no accidents with the Lord. Looking back, you can see the threads, but at the time it didn't feel like a series of deliberate decisions. So two things happened. Solas was set up round about 2010 by a Scottish Presbyterian pastor called David Robertson, and David's into all kinds of things. And David was very early engaged on social media, very active on social media. Those who know him sort of joke how the man gets any sleep, because it seems he responds to anything and everything within seconds. But that actually has given him quite a large platform. And so David was playing in that space. I was in Canada from 2010 to 2016 before coming back to the UK and taking over from David at Solas. And in Canada, I was working for an organisation kind of not dissimilar to Solas, covering Canada. And Canada's so big. I mean, it's the second biggest country on Earth. And if Russia keeps shrinking, it'll be the first, as Canadians like to joke. And how do you cover that space? So we were beginning as a small team of 7 of us to think, okay, we need to be thinking digitally. And we came up with one day, and one of my colleagues and I were out for coffee, and we were brainstorming. And I don't know which one of us had the idea of going, why don't we just try making some short videos? So we booked a film crew and we holed ourselves up in the office for a week. And in a week we filmed 50 5-minute videos. There were 2 of us, so I would film one, he'd film one, and so on. And what we did is we took 50 common questions or objections about Christian faith, 5-minute answers, and we released those over the next year, one a week on YouTube. Back then it was Twitter, and so on. And we were amazed how those took off very quickly. Some of those are getting thousands, tens of thousands of views. 2 audiences primarily, non-Christians are finding them, and we could tell that by the comments, because if you get an angry atheist comment, I'm actually quite positive. So
yes, actually that means they've seen the video.
And also Christians saying, oh, this is great. I can use this if I'm out for a coffee or down the pub or at work with a friend and a question comes up. I now know where to go. Then I came back to the UK 2016, and I sat down with Solas, who were already at that point a bit more digitally engaged, and I showed them that model, and we took it and we refined it. And it became a video series called Short Answers that we've done at Solas now. We do that, still do that. That still goes on. Every twice a month we put one of those out, about 200 now. And some of those we did one on Islam actually. I did one called Why I'm Not a Muslim, and that's got 1.2 million views, which is ridiculous. But then the other thing we were finding was that for the younger generation, the sort of the Gen Zs or whatever, I'm never quite sure the correct terminology these days, but the kind of the younger ones, the feedback we were getting was that 5 minutes is a lifetime. If you're 15, like 5 minutes, like empires have risen and fallen in 5 minutes. So we made the move kind of about 18 months ago to go, okay, out there is the Wild West that is TikTok, where the most common video length is 1 minute. And we challenged ourselves to going, okay, we've learned to explore things in 5 minutes. Can we do them 1 minute? And actually, it turns out you can. It's just that if you've got a 5 minute video, you might get 3 points. In a 1 minute video, you got 1 point. And again, we've been amazed, Matt, by where those videos have gotten. So we kind of stumbled into it. It was an accidental idea down a coffee shop, and it was an accidental mashup between me and the Solas DNA coming back. And the other thing we've learned as well, sort of final thought at this point of the pod, I think, is that we've also learned to experiment. So if anyone goes to the Solas website, Solas social media feeds, you're seeing the things that have worked. Some things we've tried have flopped. They haven't taken off. We've tried different formats. And I think in the digital space, if we're going to engage individually or as churches or as ministries, don't be afraid of experimenting and go, I'll try some ideas here. You can do the kind of old A/B testing thing. I'll try different ideas. That one worked, that one didn't. It's okay. I'll let that one go. Try this one.
I think that's an interesting journey just to reflect on that you've been on with with two organisations really, and I know for a number of the mission partners that we support at Echoes, that digital content creation has really taken off, probably over that same spell actually. Particularly focusing on YouTube and Instagram and things like that. And you've sort of started to touch on my next question, but I think it's good to draw it out as a really clear and precise sort of point. Why is it important that we as Christians do engage seriously and maybe to say credibly in the digital realm today?
Well, let's take those two adjectives, seriously and credibly. The serious piece comes back to Christians have always done two things throughout church history. Sometimes not so well, sometimes better, but two things that has always driven the church forward, I think, has been stepping outside the four walls of comfort and going into the public square. We see that model in the Bible. I mean, Jesus has an itinerant wandering ministry. He doesn't just sit in a house and say, people come to me. He's outside. Yes, he does stuff in synagogues, but lots of stuff outside. Comes through to the book of Acts. And you look at Paul. Paul would go to a town and find, okay, where's the big public space where people are talking about? Is it the amphitheatre? Is it the marketplace? Look at Acts 17, where he goes down to the Areopagus. That was where people came to talk about ideas. Paul doesn't run away from that. Or Ephesus, the lecture hall of Tyrannus that he rents for 2 years. So we've always gone into the public square, and then we scroll forward through church history. Missionaries have always done that. Think of the big Billy Graham missions here in the UK. What would the BGEA do? They'd rent a football stadium. They wouldn't just do a big church. They'd get out there. Well, now out there doesn't just look physically. Now out there looks digitally. When Twitter was launched, it was designed to be the world's public square. I think Jack Dorsey, who created it, that was one of the things he wanted it to be. Now, whether you like it or loathe it, that's by the by. The point is that's where people are hanging out. One of the problems now, of course, that digital public square is fractured. So you have X as it is now, you have Blue Sky, you have Facebook, you have LinkedIn. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But those are the places people are. And the great thing is that people are talking about faith. I mentioned TikTok a while ago. When I first got onto that platform, I was astonished how many people are talking about faith and spirituality. And yes, it's a wild west. Some of the ideas, you're like, what on earth? But actually, there are some amazing Christian voices in there. So that's the reason we need to be there, because if we aren't, others will be, and say we're standing on the shoulders of giants here. You mentioned credibly. That's important, because sometimes we in the church, where things have gone wrong, is we leap off and do things in a half thought through way. Now, we can do that as churches. We can have a really naff church website that looks like it was designed about 1994. That is possible. Try not to do that. It's better to do something really simpler and do it really well than try and do it complex and chaotic. But then for individuals, if you're listening to this as a Christian individual, as many of you will be on this podcast, if you're on Facebook or wherever you are, think about your own social media feed. So we'll call it Facebook now, just because that's easier to just use that as the example, because the demographic who are listening are probably more of a Facebook crowd, I would have thought. There are two mistakes I think Christians can make on Facebook. One is that you do nothing. You look at your Facebook feed, it's nothing more than pictures of your cat or your back garden. That's lovely. Your cat is part of God's creation, yes, but maybe there are ways of just being a bit more Christian in a way that fits your personality. Maybe just talk about the book you're reading, or if you've read the Bible that morning and there's a verse that struck you, just try sharing, hey, I read my Bible this morning, this verse really leapt out, and see how the Lord uses that. So one mistake is to say nothing. The other mistake is to go the other way and fill your Facebook feed with all kinds of Christian junk, and the worst kind of Christian junk. I can see the phone lines lighting up with angry comments now. Avoid Christian conspiracy theories. And I'm tempted to say, if you are tempted by this, you know who you are. I've got one or two friends who are in this kind of space, and I've seen things on, how COVID is a government conspiracy to control us, through to, the country is run by whoever, to mad stuff, just mad stuff. And then what will happen is they'll put lots of Christian videos too. And now here's a video on evidence for the resurrection. The problem you have is your non-Christian friend looks at that and goes, oh, so the evidence for the resurrection is on the same level of credibility as your mad theory about
lizard people.
Lizard people, and they dismiss the whole thing. Don't do that. If you want to talk about conspiracy theories, I don't know, go to the coffee shop or the pub with 2 or 3 of your curious friends and have that conversation. Do it in a room where you can close the doors. Think about, how would a non-Christian think if they came across my social media feed? Would I look like a normal person? So yeah, I think put pictures of the cat, your garden, your family, your friends, a Bible verse, a book you've been reading. If you come across a great article about Christian faith that you think, hey, you know what, my non-Christian friends might enjoy that, share that, do that. But yeah, please be credible.
I think that's a really key one. And we've talked, that would be one challenge, probably particularly to individuals.
Yeah.
But if we think of broader challenges now for engaging in the digital sphere, it's certainly in the time that we're in, and it's probably worth saying that this is being recorded in early 2026.
So it'll be out of
and
date
what we
soon.
could,
Yeah.
you could, if you are listening to this in 2027, anything could have happened by then. At this point in 2026, what would the kind of challenges be that we need to be aware of when we're producing content, when we're trying to engage online?
That's a really good question, Matt. And actually, there's a whole raft of challenges. So let me just name a few of them. I'm actually going to start with one that might surprise you, given everything we've just said. And that's that the digital world is great, but we don't want people to live their lives in the digital space. So be careful and reflective about, I want to be engaging people there, but I want to be pulling them out of there to here. Because digital stuff does a lot of things really well. It can convey information very well, but we're wired for relationship. And the gospel is relational. And most people who come to faith don't come to faith sitting in front of their computer on their own because they've watched a video. What has happened, that video has maybe caused them to perhaps talk to a friend or check church out or do something. And one group who needs to be particularly careful with this, I would say, anyone listening to this who's involved in any kind of youth ministry. I get nervous when I see Christian youth ministries that are trying to basically run everything on WhatsApp and just turn their kids onto the digital world as the main source of contact. I've got teenagers in the house. We feel passionately about this. There's been so much evidence done on the damage that phones can do to young people. So just be conscious of that. They're there, I want to engage them, but I don't want to encourage them to spend more time there. I don't want to make them choose that rather than in person. So just be wary of that warning. Secondly, don't get drawn into online arguments. Social media can be very, very toxic, high energy, very competitive spaces. The algorithms work on that. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they want people to argue with each other. That's why if you fire up X on your phone, you scroll for long, you'll see people shouting at each other because the algorithms like that. Don't get sucked into that. If somebody says something, you put a video up on your social media feed individually or as a church. If an angry atheist says something, don't go angry Christian back at them. You can ignore them. You don't have to respond to everything. If it's really offensive, you can delete the comment. And thirdly, it's okay to go, thanks for your comment. I disagree with you, but thanks for watching. And just walk away. It's okay to do that. Don't pour petrol onto the flame war. And I've seen a lot of Christians fall down that rabbit hole. Think before you click send. And then the third principle I've always thought about as well, remember that the people you're engaging with are human beings. So if you're discussing one-to-one with somebody, if you're trying to reach somebody, think through the same kind of questions that you would if you were if you were having a disagreement with a friend or a neighbor or trying to reach a community in your town. Think of them as human beings. Pray for them. Try and picture them in your mind. Who am I trying to reach here? How am I trying to engage? And then, in all that you do, be winsome. Whereas somebody once said, be winsome in order that you might win some. I think that's Rebecca Pippert said that in one of her books.
Those are some really helpful principles, and I think it can be assumed that people do know how to use Facebook well or Instagram well or that kind of thing. There's a danger that we don't realise it's quite the public space that it truly is. That actually, what our comments, even if some of them we can lock it down, we can close groups to our friends or whatever that might be, but actually it's a lot more public than perhaps we believe it to be.
I think that's right, and I think actually always, that's another good principle you've introduced there, Matt. I think always anything you do online, assume that you're doing with everybody watching, because even in small groups, I'm sure anyone listening to this never would, but if you're in a closed WhatsApp group, don't be going around saying something rude about someone in your community or some group, because that may well come out. As we are recording this, the headlines are full because the government's in a lot of trouble, because a lot of WhatsApps have come out around the whole Peter Mandelson thing as we've been recording this, and there's a lesson there of going, anything you say, you may think it's to you and 3 other people, it will come out. So as Christians, let's model that.
Yeah. Yes.
Even in our private conversations.
I wanted to touch on it in a moment, that point that you raised about bringing people into a kind of real world.
Yeah.
In fact, real world's probably the wrong term, because I think viewing the digital world as not real is not helpful. Right, yeah. But into a sort of a bricks and mortar physical world connection. But before I do, just thinking about the opportunities of digital evangelism, one of the things that we would see at Echoes is that there is a real value in using digital content, whether that would be live content or pre-recorded, in whatever platform that is, in reaching hard to reach people or hard to reach people groups. What would your comment be on that as a priority?
I think it's a huge priority and a huge opportunity. And what's interesting is that works both on the big global scale and also the small local scale. So on the big global scale, you'll know this given the passions that you have here at Echoes. There are people groups and there are countries and there are regions where it's very, very hard for missionaries to go. And sometimes there's places nearer to home. We have very good friends of ours who are missionaries who a few years ago were thrown out of Turkey because Turkey cracked down on missionaries. You could still get in, but it's really, really hard. But digital content can get past those barriers. And there are lots and lots of stories of Muslims particularly, which is one of my passions, being impacted by that. In fact, I have a friend of mine who's a missionary to Muslims now, based in the West. He was based in the Muslim world for some years. Has a lovely story of somebody who sought him out in London a few years ago. The gentleman who sought him out was from Saudi. I'm going to be careful not to give too many details away. He was quite senior in the Saudi government, and he managed to slip his bodyguard and meet my friend for a coffee. And the backstory is he'd come across all sorts of content that my friend had been posting online and was ready to leave Islam and just needed to. I had a couple more questions, prayed to receive Christ. And then every time he came through in London on business, he would seek my friend out and they do some more discipleship. But I remember my friend saying to me, this guy said to him, please pray for us because there are dozens like us. So that was a good example of digital content doing something. But then at the much lower end, we've also got our friends who are not Muslim or other religions, but here in our own country, who are perhaps atheist or secular, postmodern. If we invite them to church on Sunday, their probable initial reaction is going to be to say, no, I'm not interested. But they're watching stuff. You can share stuff. And when that happens, again, God can use that in amazing ways. A really good contemporary, very recent example of that. We had a young lady reach out to us at Solas just before Christmas, and she had been searching. She was spiritually hungry and had been searching for some questions, had landed on the Solas website, and come and ended up watching dozens of those short answer videos I mentioned, which were never intended to be like binge watched. She'd binge watched them through, and then she emailed my colleague. I emailed the Solas office over Christmas, actually. My colleague picked it up, saying, this has been really helpful. I've got a couple of last questions. I don't suppose it'd be possible to meet somebody, because I'd love to talk through more in person. So she wanted to get it offline, and she was up in Yorkshire. And praise the Lord, she and her boyfriend were university students. They were in a town where we got a really good friend of ours, so we were able to hook them up with my friend Dave and his wife, who had them round for coffee. And over a sort of 3-hour period, first the girl comes to faith in Christ, and her boyfriend apparently had started the evening by saying, "I'm definitely a Christian." Halfway through the evening was like, "Actually, I'm not sure I am a Christian." And then in the evening it's like, I think I need to become a Christian. So the two of them came to Christ. So it started with her Googling a question about faith. And that's just a 19-year-old Western university student, atheist background, very committed atheist family, which is one of her struggles because she couldn't talk about faith because her mum or dad would ridicule her. So she was going online searching for stuff.
It is that soft's maybe the wrong term, but soft landing that it can give to people in that engagement where they are in a situation where those around them would maybe at best ridicule, at worst actually do someone harm, perhaps in certain countries. Just makes it so powerful. So in my previous line of work, I used to do quite a lot of training in education, and a friend of mine who I used to work with, who'll get very excited that I'm using his phrase on the podcast. But we used to have people join events we were running on Zoom, and people the people that watch with their camera off and their microphone on mute, and they don't put their name in properly. And he used to nickname them pretendees. We used to get really annoyed when we had people on training that were like that. Come on, turn your camera on, engage. But actually, if you are, particularly in live environments, if you are in a closed country where you could get in trouble, where somebody could recognise you, tell your family that you were engaging with such and such a thing, being that person who can be anonymous, but maybe engage is so powerful.
It absolutely is. I used to do quite a lot of work sort of 10, 15 years ago. There's a big there's a big website full of resources for engaging Muslims called answering-islam.org. .org's important. There's a Muslim sort of parody site called with .com. So answering-islam.org. One of the things they do, it was wonderful to be part of. They get hundreds of people each month. They used to get emailing in with questions. Sometimes angry, sometimes genuinely engaged. And they had a network of people like me around the world who volunteered, and they would hook you up, and then it would go on to email. And some wonderful conversations. Let's say sometimes with Muslims who wanted to debate, but an awful lot of, I genuinely want to know more about this Jesus. Tell me more. And it was a real privilege. And it gave them that way of doing that at a distance, at a safety. And you very rarely saw a face. Often these folks wouldn't want to be on a screen, probably for all the reasons you described, but they were happy to email.
That's an interesting point, actually. And I think maybe we just follow a little rabbit trail for a moment with this.
Good.
You picked up on a point that you've got your sort of angry person who comments on a post and engages that way, and then you've got some who maybe still come across as quite intense, but are actually genuinely interested in the digital world. How are there any tips that you have for working out who to spend our time engaging with? Because if you engage with every angry comment, you won't have time. But you within those angry comments, there might be a genuinely thoughtful person.
That's why it can be, sometimes even with an angry comment, just responding kindly and saying, thank you for your comments. I appreciate you feel strongly about this, but thanks for watching. Now, if you just get a rudeness back, that's a good test right away. Okay, they're not engaging at all. Sometimes I've done that, and people have said, oh, well, thank you for responding. Well, that's interesting. You've got a chink now. So you can gently prod. I wouldn't, to an angry comment, immediately respond with a complete rebuttal to what they've said. I'd want to find out what's going on. So perhaps something that inquires slightly. The other end of that spectrum is if you get someone who says a nice comment, again, just responding and saying, oh, thank you, can be nice, because you started a conversation. You can, again, prod and see. So don't feel you have to engage at a deep level everywhere. The other thing as well that's important saying here is, remember as well, use comments as a litmus test for who's watching. I, funnily enough, learnt this in the physical world. I used to do a lot of sharing my faith at a place called Speaker's Corner, kind of in London, up a ladder, preaching to Muslims. And I learnt very early on that you'd get the kind of loud hecklers in the front row. Don't worry about those, we were taught. Behind those are dozens and dozens of people who are listening and watching. And in fact, what the hecklers are trying to do is to get you to focus here and not on the people behind. So ignore the noise and preach to the people who are listening. And so behind those angry comments, I always like to say, behind every angry atheist comment, maybe there's 10 atheists who watched this and thought, oh, that's intriguing. And then the other thing as well, and again, range of people probably listening to this podcast, Matt, different social media feels differently. So if as you pray around this and you're thinking, do you know what, maybe God is calling me to try being out there in a digital space, there are different ways of doing it. X and Blue Sky have that kind of immediate, real heat of the moment kind of feel to them. Facebook, a bit longer form. You can write a long form Facebook comment. It's more permanent, the stuff you put on your wall. And then if you're a more reflective person, the platform I've just discovered in the last 2 months, and I am loving because it's much more chilled out. I've launched onto Substack. And Substack, if you're someone who likes writing and creativity, that's much more angled that way. And you very rarely meet angry skeptics there. You meet people who disagree with you, but it's a much slower, more sort of coffee shop vibe. So I would say, yeah, don't feel you have to go, oh, if I'm going on social media, it's going to look like the Wild West of TikTok. There are different types of social media, and it may just be that you need to find the one that works for you. So give things a try.
I think you touch on a really important point there, Andy, just around the way in which we engage personally with social media should reflect our own personalities. For me, I'm not someone who loves rapid response to kind of, WhatsApp groups are something that I'm part of, but under duress, in the sense that they move much more quickly than my brain does. So I would probably be with you in the sort of Substack area, but but I think just it does bring us on to how we personally might use this, and this is where we started. This is where we come back to. But I'll frame the question more in relation to those particularly who are engaged in maybe what might be termed full-time mission work. So, for example, mission partners on the Echoes list who might be listening, and perhaps they've been thinking, I'm not really engaging in the digital space at the moment, but I really feel from talking to people in my church, in my community, that I could be, and maybe I should be. Where would you suggest they start to think, and where would they start to go to sort of test the waters, as it were? Yeah,
that's a really good question. I'd say for mission partners, there's a couple of thoughts here. One, I'll do one very briefly. One is that actually, if you're a missionary or a mission agency, the digital space is a great way to keep people updated. So some of the missionaries that we support, it's great. They're on social media, and they've decided they're using it as a way to keep their friends and supporters updated. And that's lovely, because rather than wait for like a quarter to get the massive, great, 5-page PDF, you get more immediate what's going on today, so we can be praying. And actually, we've now done that at Solas. We now have a WhatsApp group where our most dedicated supporters, about 120 of them, anytime I'm speaking, one of the team is speaking somewhere, we update them. And they like it. They like the fact they can pray there and then. So you can use it as a prayer tool. Secondly, in terms of then reaching those who are not Christians, principle number one, I would say, is ask yourself the question, are you called to do the digital thing? Because we're not all called to the digital thing. Like you say, WhatsApp, I hate WhatsApp. Like I'm part of it as, groups under duress. Sometimes we have to for our work.
I'm a conscientious collaborator.
I like that. I like that a lot. But some of you listening to this, you're not on doing digital stuff. You don't have to do digital stuff. Don't feel guilty. Don't have someone sort of strong arm you and go, it's the 21st century, mate. You should be on Instagram. No, you don't have to be. And some of you are called to stay well away from it, either because you'd hate it, or you're just not wired that way, or quite frankly, you know that you'd end up spending every hour God sends on social media because you've got an addictive personality. Stay, danger, Will Robinson, stay well away. Others of you are thinking, no, actually, I do feel the Lord give me a nudge here to try something. The first step I would recommend, if you're not doing anything at all, Matt, would be look around for good examples of others. Steal like a bandit, to quote Steve Jobs, the sort of the co-founder of Apple, because other people will be out there doing great stuff. I say this to churches too, around things like church websites and stuff. Don't start with a blank canvas. Spend some time looking. Who are other people in my kind of space? If you're a missionary to Muslims, are there other people engaging in the Muslim world or in that kind of area? You're like, I like what they're doing. Don't copy slavishly, but it might inspire you. And then the other thing I would then say on the back of that, baby steps. The great thing is social media, digital spaces, they allow you to kind of innovate and tweak and change things. So just because you start perhaps doing your Instagram this way doesn't mean you're committed to doing it for the next 5 years. So you can test things out a little bit. Well, I'm going to try this and do this gently. Okay, that was all right. I'm going to try this. Oh, this type of post got a slightly better engagement. I'm gonna refine and learn. So I'm trying to learn all the time. I mean, I've been on social media and digital things since the beginning. I'm old enough to remember when the Mosaic browser launched in 1994, whenever it was. And over the years, I've just tried things, and some things have gone by the wayside. Other things have carried on. So yeah, learn. Do you need to be on there? Learn from others and experiment. And I think that's a great platform to begin with.
Brilliant. And I think that's actually a great sort of way to pull together our conversation actually on the podcast today. But if we finish the way we finished the last one around how prayer shapes this type of thing, you've already touched upon one aspect of it, praying for the people you in your comments section, as it were. How could our prayer life be shaped by this in various different ways?
There's a whole number of things you can pray around digital. Some of us maybe need to pray, Lord, I'm on digital too much. help me get the balance right. This is not a podcast to talk about those issues, but I know that's an adjacent issue. Some of us maybe need to pray for the courage to engage. So whether to getting the balance right around digital things, I think bring that before the Lord. I'm a great believer that digital devices, be they phones, tablets like the one you've got there, laptops, they're black mirrors. As Charlie Brooker, the creator of the TV show Black Mirror, popularized that phrase. Of course, mirrors reflect. Digital stuff reflects our own hearts.
Yes.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's uncomfortable. Bring all that before the Lord. Don't feel guilty, don't feel any of those things. Just use that as a way to pray. Secondly, I think pray before you send anything. Think before you tweet, as the old saying goes. No, pray before you send something. If you're engaging in something, a comment to somebody or a piece of content you're putting out, I think pray, Lord, I want this to bring glory to you. I want this to point to you, not to me. And I think praying helps you do that. And then pray about the response you get. Because again, if you're trying to engage, the danger of social media and the way the algorithms are constructed, that infernal like button is a horrible thing. I remember seeing an interview with Jaron Lanier, who's a computer scientist who was involved in Facebook in the early days. He was one of the team who invented the like button. And he says, I now feel incredibly guilty because it was meant to be a way just of affirming people. But we didn't realize we were creating this sort of algorithmic hamster wheel where people are going to start rating their lives based on... And Christians are not immune. We can go, oh my word, I've arrived. That post I did got 50 likes. I am the king of digital evangelism. That way life's pride. Equally, you can go, oh man, that only got 10 people watched it. I'm a disaster. I shouldn't be here. Don't assess your value as an online evangelist on the number of engagements. Yes, it's important to think about these things, but the devil has a way of twisting those into our hearts. So make sure our identity is firmly based in Christ. Wrap the whole thing in prayer, and then whatever happens, that underneath the everlasting arms. That is as true in the digital space as it is in the physical one.
Yeah, I think those are great prayer points actually, and really poignant, whoever we are.
Yeah.
So thank you for another great conversation, Andy.
It's been great. Thank you, man.
On the podcast. Thank you.
Mission on the Move. Don't miss out. Download the new Echoes International app and pray and stay connected with Mission every day.